Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Melanoma Research Foundation's Ask the Expert series. My name is Amy Marbaugh. I'm the Senior Education Officer here at the MRF, and we are thrilled to have you join us today for this wonderful educational opportunity entitled Understanding the Clinical Trial Process and Current Clinical Trials for Ocular Melanoma Patients. Our mission at the MRF is to eradicate melanoma by funding research to find a cure while educating to and advocating for the melanoma community. Education is critical for patients to help them make informed decisions about their care. We're grateful to TriSalus Life Science on their generous support of today's webinar and investment in the MRF's mission. TriSalus's multi-pronged approach is investigating the treatment of liver metastases and pancreatic solid tumors by leveraging immunomodulation therapy or other tumor-killing agents with their FDA-cleared regional delivery technology. A brief medical disclaimer before we get started. We encourage you to use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout today's session. The information presented today is for educational purposes, and any individual treatment questions should always be directed to your individual healthcare provider. We encourage you to visit our website at melanoma.org to learn more about the resources we have available. And the session will be available after as part of our video library that you can share with family and friends. Today, we're joined by a diverse group who will explain different approaches of the clinical trial process, liver-directed therapy techniques, and what clinical trials are currently available for ocular melanoma patients. And most importantly, we'll also hear from an ocular melanoma patient who will share her experiences of participating on a clinical trial. Our first speaker is Dr. Cam Montazeri. She's an academic oncologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, where she specializes in the care of patients with melanoma, with a particular academic interest in novel treatments for uveal melanoma. Dr. Montazeri is also an instructor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She has multiple publications in academic oncology, several ongoing translational projects in uveal melanoma, and currently leads several clinical trials as a principal investigator at the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center, studying novel and immune-based therapies for patients with cutaneous and uveal melanoma. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Montazeri.
Thank you so much, Amy, for the introduction. So the first thing that comes to our mind is that what are clinical trials and why should we participate in clinical trials? Clinical research studies are basically trials that include patients or human volunteer participants, rather, to answer specific questions. And the main goal is to find new ways to improve outcomes for patients and to test either new treatments or new combinations of some of the existing treatments. The goal of each study is to eventually determine if one treatment through the investigation can help a participant, or does it not change the outcome, or rather would it be harmful to the outcomes of the patient. All of the treatments that are currently available to us have gone through these phases of clinical trials and have been first tested through clinical trials. And the treatments that are studied in clinical trials, even in the earliest phases of clinical trials, have already undergone rigorous testing to minimize any safety risks for the participants. They have first been evaluated in a series of multiple preclinical studies. And if the preliminary results of those preclinical studies show that the new treatment is doing what it's supposed to do, and if it is safe at those stages, then the researchers proceed to seek permission from the FDA to move with the clinical trial phase. There are multiple different phases to a clinical trial, and I took this from the MD Anderson website because they already had made a nice picture. I didn't have to redo it. The first phase of a clinical study is where the basically investigation starts. It either is the first time that the drug is being tested or the treatment is being tested in those group of patients, or sometimes it's the first time that it is being tested in human participants. And its main focus is on the safety of the treatment. And it usually involves less than or fewer than 50 patients. And these patients are monitored very carefully during this phase to find whether it is safe to give the treatment, and to also find the right dosage amount of the new treatment for next phases and for the patient. And also it looks to see if there are any signs of response to the treatment. And if the phase 1 results are encouraging, then usually the next phase is phase 2 trial. And sometimes if they are very encouraging, the researchers may decide to get the permission of FDA to move directly to phase 3. In phase 2 part of the clinical studies, the focus is mainly on the effectiveness of the drug or the treatment, but also it is monitored closely for any new side effects or any recurrent side effects, and the safety is always an ongoing issue to be monitored. Usually it involves about 100 patients, more or less. And if there are encouraging results in phase 2, then in phase 3, more patients are enrolled and participated in the study. And in phase 3 trials, these new treatments are compared to standard of care, sometimes alone and sometimes a combination of the standard treatments. And the goal is to see if these treatments, based on the design of the study, work as well as the existing treatments, or do they work better? Sometimes we find negative results in these phases, and sometimes there are positive results and the drug gets approved by the FDA. And then during phase 4, which is after the approval of the drug and after it is accessible through standards of care to patients, there is ongoing monitoring for long-term effects and side effects of the treatment, and it involves many more patients. Why do we need treatment specifically for ocular melanoma or uveal melanoma patients? Well, it is a rare disease, and nevertheless, there are about 2,500 patients diagnosed only in the United States every year. And despite the treatment of the initial lesion that is diagnosed in the eye, unfortunately, about half of the patients eventually experience metastatic recurrence of the disease. And sadly, it's a very aggressive disease, and there are not a lot of effective treatments for these basically populations. And only this year, for the first time, a treatment was specifically approved by the FDA for treatment of uveal melanoma. And yes, about more than half of the patients are not eligible to receive this treatment. I'm sure you have heard of the name of tebentafusp or Kimitrak, which is a bispecific antibody, meaning that it's a drug that is designed with two arms, one arm binding to a receptor on the immune cell called T cell, and the other arm is bound to the protein that is found in some of the basically melanoma cells, with a specific HLA type or a specific molecule type that can be tested through the blood. And if patients are eligible, they receive this medication. Even those who are eligible, they may progress through this medication. And for this reason, there are always basically unmet needs for novel and effective treatment options. And okay, I just wanted to make sure that's not a question to me. So what are the benefits of participating in clinical trials? Well, people who participate in clinical trials have access to novel therapies that are not yet accessible through public standard of care treatment options. And those people are also closely monitored by their treatment team during the therapy and also afterwards for basically assessing how their disease behaves and how the treatment is working and whether it's benefiting or harming the patient. So close monitoring is also an advantage. The other also advantage, or the other benefit, is which I'm always gracious for. I'm always grateful for is how generously patients who participate in clinical trials are helping other patients in the future, because all the knowledge that we have now, all the treatments that we have now is through the clinical trials in the past. So those who participate are not only probably benefiting themselves, but also people with similar diseases in the future. There are also downsides to clinical trial participation. These are new treatments. There are a lot of unknowns about them. There are potential side effects about them. There are side effects that are not known, side effects that are not expected. And also, there is no promise that the treatment may work better than the standard of care, or sometimes it may not work at all.
We're now going to pivot to Dr. Eric Werenberg-Klee. He is an interventional radiologist, also at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, where he focuses on minimally invasive image-guided treatment for cancer. He did his residency and fellowship at Mass General, a medical internship at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, and college at Harvard. He's been very busy. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Werenberg-Klee.
Great, thanks for having me. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of the liver-directed therapies for ocular melanoma. The number of systemic therapies that are effective can be limited. It's also true that a lot of ocular melanoma patients with metastatic disease will get metastatic disease actually exclusively to the liver. And then there are other patients who will get it predominantly to the liver. So we'll have sites of metastases in the liver, although there may be metastatic disease elsewhere. We care in particular about metastases to the liver because over time, metastases to the liver can compromise your liver function, okay, making your liver not function very well. So to orient everyone to the liver, this is an illustration of a liver with a single metastasis here, okay, the liver being sort of the reddish organ and the metastasis being the brown spot. Your liver is in your sort of the right upper quadrant of your liver, of your abdomen rather, sorry, although it spreads over to the left. And we think about your liver anatomically as having a right and a left, okay. The left side of your liver being actually sort of more in your middle. Okay, when you have, let's say, a single site of disease in your liver, there's a variety of options that your doctor may discuss with you. So they may discuss surgery with you. It may just be cut out, okay? If cutting out the tumor doesn't make sense and there's a variety of reasons, we may discuss either burning or freezing the tumor with you, okay? That's called an ablation. And that's where I or one of my colleagues would stick basically a big needle into the tumor under image guidance, so typically with CT, the kind of CT scans you may have had already, to burn or freeze that tumor under image guidance, okay? So the idea being there to completely kill that tumor in the same way that you might with surgery. And I should say that this can be done for a single tumor, it can be done for a few tumors as well, okay? So if you had, for example, up to 3, for example, okay, you may be discussing that. Other options that you may hear discussed by your doctors would be external beam radiation, which is where radiation is applied from outside the body into the tumor. And rarely also arterial therapies. And again, that would have to do with specific anatomy of your tumors, okay? Now, the situation's a little different when we're talking about multiple metastases to the liver. So let's say your disease presents with spots on both sides of your liver, okay? So the liver, again, being the reddish organ, and those brown spots being tumors on both your right and left liver. And here in this illustration, what I've shown is the arteries that come to your liver, okay? So the arteries are important because when you have disease on both sides of your liver, we're actually looking mostly at arterial therapies, okay? That means therapies where we get a very small tube, very, very small tube, under image guidance all the way out to those arteries, which I'm showing there, and then applying treatment through those. So the approach is sort of, I often tell patients, think about it like a interventional cardiologist gets into the little arteries in your heart. this would be getting into the little arteries in your liver instead to give therapy. And there's a variety of different therapies that are used. I've listed them all here. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of them now, but that are used across different centers. And so those include little beads with radiation on them, which is Y90, has some other names. Sometimes little beads with chemotherapy, sometimes just the beads themselves. And also immunoembolization, which is at a couple centers, which is the little beads, but also a medication that stimulates your immune system. Okay, that's what's available. These are the options available in the United States. And I think, we're just giving this high level overview of liver therapies to help guide our discussions later about clinical trials. But there will be in coming months, my understanding is there will be a sort of a more dedicated session regarding all of these the nuances of all these different therapeutic options. Okay. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Werenberg-Klee. He and Dr. Montazeri will join us again shortly when we do a deeper dive into the current clinical trials. Our next speaker is Andrea Ozzuno. She is a clinical research associate at Mass General, specializing in melanoma clinical trials. She's been a part of over 15 melanoma studies and works closely with trial sponsors and site physicians to enroll patients into trials and confirm their eligibility. She's been at Mass General since 2021 and has her bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from the City College of New York. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to kind of do a deeper dive into what patients can expect once a doctor tells them that they might be eligible for a clinical trial.
All right, so as Amy mentioned, I am a clinical research associate at the Massachusetts General Hospital. So one of my main tasks in this role is to enroll patients into clinical trials. So I can provide just a brief overview of what the clinical trial enrollment process looks like and what to expect. So the first thing that we look at when considering patients in clinical trials are the eligibility criteria of a study. So this is a list of requirements that must be met in order to participate in a clinical trial. These criteria are study specific, so they may vary from study to study and may include some factors like age, medical history, or current health status, which are evaluated through labs, which I will discuss a bit later on. But these criteria exist to help researchers have accurate and meaningful results so that there are no external factors that may be influencing the results of the study, and also to prevent patients with underlying conditions from being exposed to any additional risks. So the most important part of the enrollment process is the informed consent. So this is a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the study's subject's decision to participate. Informed consent is documented by means of a written, signed, and dated informed consent form. So once a physician feels that a patient is a potential candidate for a clinical trial and meets the basic eligibility requirements for a trial, they are provided the informed consent form. And this consent form contains the description of the purpose of the study research, the duration of the treatment, the schedule of assessments, which includes a description of the procedures that are involved and when these procedures will be required. It also consists of a list of potential risks or side effects that may be encountered and also potential benefits to the study intervention. Any costs that are associated with the study will also be listed, and also if there's financial compensation, this will also be included in the consent form. So the patients will have time to review this consent form. They will have the opportunity to ask questions to the physician or anyone in the research staff. If a patient feels like they want to participate in this trial, then they will sign and date the consent form, and the physician will also sign and date the consent form. This form is not a binding document and can be withdrawn at any time. So from the moment you sign consent, even before enrollment to after, consent can be withdrawn. So after signing consent, patients will undergo the screening period. So this is the period of completing assessments to confirm eligibility that is listed in the eligibility criteria. So no study required procedures will be done until consent is obtained. These assessments may include imaging, biopsy, blood sample collections, urinary sample collection, a physical examination, and an in-depth review of a patient's medical history and medication. And again, this is just to confirm that subjects are meeting all the eligibility criteria that are listed in the study. So these assessments are reviewed by the site staff, someone like myself, a study coordinator, the research staff, and research nurses, the physicians, as well as the trial sponsor. And this is to double, triple, quadruple check that the patient meets all eligibility criteria and that they are a good match for the study. And once this is confirmed, then the patient is enrolled in the clinical trial and we may begin the treatment that is outlined in the consent form. I'll pass it on to Amy.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, we're going to turn back to Dr. Werenberg-Klee and Dr. Montazeri. We'll have Dr. Werenberg-Klee go first to kind of review some of the current clinical trials available for ocular melanoma patients.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to be discussing are the available clinical trials for ocular melanoma that focus on liver-directed therapies. Okay, and I'm going to start by talking about a trial that's currently active at our site that Cam and I are working on, which is the sponsor is TriSalus. The name of the trial overall is PERIO-01. That's not that meaningful, it's just an acronym. But what it's looking at is the use of a medication called SD101, which is a TLR9 agonist, which I'll explain briefly, that is then delivered via your hepatic arteries using a special catheter that TriSalus has developed as well. And we're evaluating this drug alone as well as the drug in combination with immunotherapies. And so the rationale of this medication is one of the reasons that it is hypothesized that the various checkpoint inhibitors, the immune therapies, haven't worked as well in ocular melanoma, relates to the burden of metastatic disease and kind of unique features of your liver as what's called an immune tolerant organ. Sorry, have I frozen here? My video is frozen. You guys have, okay, I'm back. Okay, so there's a hypothesis that your liver sort of allows tumors to grow in a way that they wouldn't grow elsewhere. And this drug, SD101, is supposed to reprogram your liver, the immune environment in your liver, to be more responsive to immune therapy. Okay. The idea of the trial itself, in terms of what it involves a little bit, is it's actually 6 different infusions. Those are day procedures. There's obviously more to it than that, and we can get into the details, I guess, in the Q&A, I think. But and this is an active trial. It's both at MGH, it's at Columbia, it's at Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia, University of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, and MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Okay, and it's a trial that we're very excited about. Okay, in terms of other liver-directed therapies that are also enrolling. Okay, so there's a medication called melphalan that is actually in current use in Europe, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and has gone through a trial in the United States where they're anticipating approval, but it's not yet approved. And so they have what's called an open label expanded access study. And in this case, the drug melphalan is what's being used, and this company Delcath that has that trial has a special infusion system set up to basically allow the medication, again, to be just delivered directly to the liver and then filtered out of your body. And the idea of that is that melphalan can be very bad for your blood cells if it's distributed throughout your whole body. So the idea is to minimize your systemic exposure to that with their isolated perfusion system. And that is actually currently available as at a couple different places at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida, and then at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. Okay. Then there are a couple smaller studies that are only open at single centers. Okay, one is a single arm trial of a novel treatment called a tumor treating field in combination with immunotherapies. So nivolumab and ipilimumab are immunotherapies. And tumor treating fields is a relatively new treatment concept that's been used in a couple other tumor types. But the idea is to basically break open tumor cells temporarily to be more immunogenic, to make your immune system more aware that they're bad, if you will. And then you do that in combination with PD-1 and CTLA-4 inhibitors, the immune therapies, to rev up your immune system response. Okay, so that's available in Arizona, in a site in Arizona, in Scottsdale. And then I had mentioned that radiation can be used as well for treatment of tumors. And there's a specific study in San Francisco looking at the use of what's called SBRT, so which is very focused radiation, again, used with immunotherapy. And then I thought it worth mentioning as well that there are a couple studies open in Europe as well, just at single centers in Europe. So these actually are also done in combination with Melphalan, which I had mentioned has this open access study open in the United States. But in Europe, where Melphalan's already approved and their system's already approved, it's also being evaluated in combination with immunotherapy. A couple different studies. One of them is in Sweden, but basically the same study is also open in the Netherlands. Okay. And I should note that all of these trials, these lists I've provided are easily accessible by anyone. You can search on clinicaltrials.gov. And as I note in the bottom right here, you type in uveal melanoma, and it gives you a list of everything available. So you can look at this yourself and see as it changes over time. This is just the currently active recruiting studies for liver-directed therapy. I think that's all I have on current studies. I'll move on to Cam, I guess, and then we'll do questions afterwards. Is that right, Amy?
Yeah, we'll talk with Kristen, and then we'll do a broad Q&A.
Oh, great. Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so my turn again. All right. So unfortunately, the treatments that work very well for skin melanomas or cutaneous melanomas are not as effective in uveal melanomas. And the combination of two immunotherapy agents is less than 20% effective, about 17% at best. One drug alone is about 5% or 5 to 8%, sometimes less than that, based on different data that we have from the patients that received the drugs when they were approved for metastatic melanoma in general. And for these reasons, we are always looking to find medications that work better than immunotherapy, or if the combination of those with immunotherapy and checkpoint inhibitors improves the response of checkpoint inhibitors, that's also something that's getting investigated. Sometimes it's combined with radiation therapy, sometimes it's combined with other investigational agents to improve the response to immunotherapy. One of the novel ways of doing systemic therapy is this combination, this drug that is being tested. This trial is open at some of the centers, as Dr. Wernberg-Clee mentioned. This is available at basically clinicaltrials.gov, and this is a dynamic enrollment, meaning that it may be open up until a certain point, and sometimes it changes by the time that basically patients need to get access to that trial. So you need to check on these yourselves. That might not be accurate if you listen to this or watch this a while later. This drug is basically the way it's thought that it may work is that it sits on a combination that is in charge of unwinding and opening the DNA in the cell. The reason it's important is that basically DNA is a template for making copies of itself and then translationing to proteins or to basically materials that are needed by the body and also needed by the cell to replicate and do its function. And sometimes changes that happen in this chromatin are of interest for making drugs and make them susceptible for basically treatment. And one of these studies, which is called, the drug is called SHD 286, doesn't have a name yet at this phase. It is supposed to sit on this complex, on this chromatin complex, and prevent the basically DNA translation to protein. And another study that we will open soon at our center, I anticipate that it's going to get activated, and Andrea is a better person to confirm when exactly, is a novel agent that works on the GNAQ11 basically mutation site. And this is a mutation that is very common in uveal melanoma. And this drug is supposed to basically target this mutation as a systemic therapy. This is an international study, and it's going to be open in different continents and different countries coming up. The other interesting way of treating melanoma and other cancers in general is always with immunotherapy and with other agents, and is to activate or to wake up your own immune system so it can do the job and go after the cancer cells and kill them. Sometimes the problem is that, and there are multiple different types of immune cells. T cells in general are the ones that are more in charge of this. And the specific type of T cells that are of interest in this setting are killer T cells. So basically, normally they should do the job and go and kill the tumor cells. Sometimes there is not enough of them. Sometimes they are not active enough for basically a long period of time. So the problem is that they're not, the duration of activation of these cells is not enough, or sometimes they need to be a little boosted and recognize the cells better. So one way of trying to help the immune system do the job better is that you take out the cells that have already gone to the tumor environment. Those T cells have already recognized the cell, the melanoma cells. So you want more of them, and you want them to be more active. And the way this is done is that you take out the melanoma tissue and kind of activate and make more of those cells and give it back to the body, and hope that they stay active for a longer period of time, and they do the job better, and there is also more of them. And this is also a trial that is done in a few centers. I think UPMC is one of them that I saw had the clinical trial active. Then we talked about different ways of doing liver-directed therapy. And as Dr. Wernberg-Klee mentioned, the drug that we were talking about that's active in our center and in some other cancer centers is SD101, which is a TLR9 agonist. Basically, its job is to help decrease the cells that don't let the immune system do its job, or kind of regulate or inhibit the immune response, and boost up the immune response. So one part of the study is to see if as you remember, the phase 1 trial is always looking to safety, to see if the drug is safe, and to find the correct dose or the best dose for the patients. And then as the next phase of the study, we're interested to see if the combination of this medication with immunotherapy medications actually would help the immunotherapy, or the combination of both, work better and have a better basically response or activation.
Great. Thanks to both of you for the overview of those available clinical trials. And for the participants, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box about any of the trials that Dr. Werenberg-Klee or Dr. Montazeri mentioned, or any other questions. All right, we're going to round out our conversation today by talking to a ocular melanoma patient herself, Kristen Norco. Kristen has been living with ocular melanoma since February of 2013. She was diagnosed with a spot on her liver in 2015, which was unfortunately found to be metastatic ocular melanoma. And in 2019, she opted to participate in a clinical trial at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was in that clinical trial for about 22 months. So Kristen, thanks so much for joining us today. You are such an amazing advocate for OM patients, so it's great to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I'm gonna have you ask me the questions because it'll be easier for me to answer them. So I'll just say,
of course.
When I started, I had an ablation in 2016. So I had one spot, and like one of the doctors said, I had an ablation, and I was NED for 2.5 years. And I was like, oh, when this comes back, I'll try to go on Kimtrack, because at that point it was still being studied, not realizing it's now in a new phase. I missed my opportunity. So I do want to discuss some of that in the clinical trial talk. But, you know, I personally, for me, knew I wanted a systemic trial just because I've been involved with the OM community, all your folks, educational programming. I wanted a clinical trial. Luckily, I had small tumors, but the weird thing is if you're going to be a patient, you have to let those tumors grow to be 1 centimeter to get into a trial. So it was weird. I was like, I'm seen at Jefferson. I'm also seen at Penn. I have the BRCA gene, so I'm a high risk for breast and ovarian cancer. And the doctor there said, if you ever metastasize, we may have a trial. And I'm like, okay, you guys don't treat any ocular melanoma there. But, you know, in this case, I wanted some out of the box thinking. And it wasn't an easy decision because I was the only patient that had ocular melanoma in this BRCA2 basket trial. So Dr. Sato was like, oh, we can do interventional treatment now, or we can wait for a trial that he had going on as well. So luckily I live in Philadelphia. I have 2 great options, and what do you choose? It's not easy. However, I was like, this is the only way I can get this one drug. Is called a PARP inhibitor, which will affect the BRCA gene. And I was like, you know what? I'll try it. Worst comes to worst, and this is one of my big advices. They're scanning you in 2 months. If it's not working, they're pulling you off, and then you can go someplace else. You're not committed like some super long term to something. So for me, you know, I spoke with Dr. Sato, I spoke with Dr. Domchek at Penn, and it's just like, what do you do? And no one really knows. Like, Sato was starting his trial, and Domchek was like, we have no ocular melanoma patients. It's a basket trial, all comers. But since there's no treatment for your cancer, you can get in. So I got in this trial, and I was very healthy. And I think that's something to keep in mind too, is where you are in your treatment scale. Like, I was really healthy going into a trial. So for me, once I agreed to the trial, and one of the persons spoke about it earlier in the talk, is all the additional scans. And that can be very stressful because I've never gotten a brain MRI in my life. I don't need to, but I needed it for this trial. I never got a full bone scan. I thought I was getting a DEXA scan. No, it was a bone scan. So all of a sudden now as a patient, I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm getting all these scans I never had to get before. And I can say it's a little bit stressful. What if something turns up? Like, we're not ever doing brain scans, for me at least. So that's part of the process, is additional scans plus your normal scans. You know, so I ended up going to the trial at Penn. I did very well. It was every other week, and I lasted 22 months. And they're scanning you every 2 months for the first, I think it was like a year. So you kind of know what's going on. And you know, at the same time, there is a time commitment. And I think that's something people need to look into when they're doing a trial. You know, I live in Philly. Both these places were honestly a 20-minute walk from my house, not even a drive. So for me, that's easy. For us on the Ocular Melanoma Facebook sites, we see people traveling, flying in for their treatments, for their clinical trials. So that is something to consider. I'm sure the woman that works with the clinical trials, I understand some sponsors will sponsor overnight stay depending on how far you are and help with some of that. So I think what it is keeping in mind, there may be some help financially for folks, but that's not in every case. So I'll let you ask me some additional questions, Amy, because I think that's going to be easier.
Well, did you have any concerns about joining a clinical trial, from a time commitment or quality of life or financial? Like, what, you sound like you're very excited to have a clinical trial option, but did you have any concerns?
Yes. Well, it was weird letting your tumor grow for 3 months before you could do anything. That was odd. Luckily for me, I'm in Philly, so I didn't have any of these extra financial concerns. I will tell you, if I was going to be looking at a trial down at Sarah Cannon, like everyone's going to, that would be a concern. I'm going to start adding up all those expenses of flights, not just for me, but for someone else to go down there with me. Like I said, for me, since I was in Philly, it was easy. I could walk there. It didn't interfere with my time. It was every other week. I even planned vacations back then. This was pre-COVID clinical trial treatment. And they were really clear with the possible side effects. I mean, it's not fun sitting and hearing every possible side effect that immunotherapy can give you. Like, I don't know how everyone goes on immunotherapy after hearing all the side effects, but they explain all this to you. And even during the trial, it was interesting. I guess they found a new potential side effect. I had to sign a new consent towards the end of my trial time because there was a new finding. So they watched you. They really watch you on these clinical trials. Someone mentioned the great care that you get. You do every 2 weeks. You are just being so cared for. Your blood's being taken. When, depending on the trial for this one, I had to go to the doctors around 8 or 9 in the morning, see my doctor, get my blood. My blood test was fine. They would send it to the pharmacy, who would then have to make the drug. And then by then I get my infusion. I mean, literally it was between 8. I was going at 8 and leave at 4. And there's a lot of time waiting around in there as well. So people need to realize, depending on what type of trial it is, you may be waiting around the day that you get your treatment because they have to wait to get your blood tests to see if they're even going to ask the pharmacy to make the drug. And all that takes time.
Yeah, it's a commitment. It's definitely a commitment to yourself and to your cancer center when you do sign up for a clinical trial.
Yes.
I guess.
I just want to say, and it might have been, you can leave a clinical trial. Like some people get so afraid, they're like, well, I signed up, I did all the scans, I did this, I don't want to do it now, like whatever. You know what? You have the one thing you do have control over in this cancer is to sign out of that clinical trial. So that's something to keep in mind. If it's not going for you, you are not committed till you start growing.
I guess one other question, and I feel like we hear this from patients often, is that that they might feel like a guinea pig when they're on a clinical trial. Was that your experience? Just kind of want to hear kind of what you thought of being maybe poked and prodded more often or scanned more often, or any other experiences like that.
I think it really depends on the phase trial that you're going in. People use the word guinea pig negatively, but at the same time, as a patient, I think that's true. If I'm going on a 1A, 1B trial, I'm a guinea pig. We talked about this earlier. It's a dose finding study. What dose works? If it works for you, great, but that's not a phase 1 trial. Like, you have to go into that phase 1 knowing that you're really benefiting science and hoping the best for yourself. Mine was a phase 2 trial, luckily. Both drugs were approved separately, and they were using them together now. So for me, I had a little bit more confidence that both of these drugs are approved drugs, but it's a phase 2 trial because they're using them together. But I didn't know if it was going to work. Even Dr. Sada was like, I don't know why you're going on this trial. One of the world experts. I'm like, wait, and I'm saying no to him and just walking over the pen with a doctor that has never seen an ocular melanoma patient in your life. So, sometimes you have to go with your gut. And I think when we were talking earlier, it's like you have to pick a train and ride it. Do your research, get your specialist, get a second opinion if you're not comfortable. We're all on the Facebook forum, a lot of us, we talk to each other. What was your experience? I think when you can start getting some comfort level that I do want to do a clinical trial. For me, I wanted that. Just because I go to so many conferences, I realize you have one spot, it's going to get more. And there's a chance it might go someplace else. Now, that's my thinking, so that's why I really wanted a systemic treatment. So, and then once I picked the trial at Penn, I'm like, I want to stay on this until it doesn't work anymore. And when it didn't work anymore, I went back to Jefferson, and now I'm not doing the trial. I'm just doing the plain interventional treatments for immunoembolization. Been going at it, like I had 14 of them already now. So, and at this point, they're like, Kristen, you're handling this treatment well. my doctors are not suggesting a clinical trial for me now because I'm handling this well. That being said, I can't wait to the MRF meeting in August at Jefferson to learn more about these clinical trials. Because really, I think as patients, the more you learn about these, you folks presenting this information, it's no longer as scary because there's a lot of us going through this. And you see people comment and people do, the drug doesn't work for them. Believe me, I did not fail that trial. That trial did not keep working for me. So you don't fail a trial, this doesn't work for you anymore. So, you got to take that mindset out. But I think we really do get so much information from these trials that really help people. I mean, some drug treatments, they're just not being used anymore. The phase 1B trials didn't really work. So now we can try something else. And then you think about the people on Kimtrack that were on Kimtrack when it was a phase 1AB, phase 2, phase 3. I mean, they've benefited from this drug before everyone else was able to in February. So, there's part of it is a risk. I think the care is so good when you're getting it. I actually ended up getting pneumonia. I thought I was gonna have to go to the ER. They did everything to keep me out of the ER. And they're like, great news, you don't have pneumonitis, but you have pneumonia. I'm like, is that good? Oh, yes, great that you don't have pneumonitis from your immunotherapy. So, like they keep you out of the ER. The doctors and nurses on the trial, they watch you so closely and they're accessible to answer any questions that you have. If you do have side effects, you can call. You're not just out on your own. I mean, I think people need to understand the care that the clinical trial team gives to you as a patient on that trial.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more personalized, individualized care sometimes on a clinical trial, just because it is such a highly watched treatment. We're going to bring everybody else up now. So Andrea, Dr. Montazeri, Dr. Werenberg, we're going to bring everybody else up. We have some questions that we will ask all of you with our remaining time. So for those of you who have been question shy, please feel free to put any questions. No question is too complicated for us to answer today. One question that I did receive, probably Dr. Montazeri might be best for you, or Dr. Werenberg. There's a lot of questions around inclusion and exclusion criteria. So how soon should patients consider a clinical trial so that they're not excluded from one in the future because of other treatments that they may have received?
Maybe it was best for Andrea, but I will answer.
Maybe Andrea would be a better person too.
It's a very good question, but I don't think there is an easy answer to that. It depends on the type of the clinical trial, depends on, case by case, it may be different. It depends on what treatments a certain participant or patient has received previously. Depending on the nature of the trial and depending on the phase of the study, and also depending on the mechanism of action of the drug, some of the prior treatments are acceptable and some of them are not, and it's all a case-by-case decision. I think if your question specifically on as to like if you're missing basically your chance or opportunity to participate in a clinical trial because it's a little later, it depends on different things. Sometimes there, because of the design and the way that the trial has basically designed as a prior commitment to show the data or real data to FDA, there are certain slots that are allowed for each clinical trial, and if those are filled, unfortunately, it's difficult to get access to the medication. I think, I'm not sure if we discussed this or not, and you might have previously discussed this at the webinars, that if we think that a combination or a drug is going to be beneficial for a patient, and if that's the only option that the patients have, even though it's not been approved, one way of getting access to the drug is to request the company to allow and also then take it to the FDA to get the permission from the FDA to use it as under compassionate use or as a single patient IND for a person. which is basically a single, basically a clinical trial with one participant. And that gives access to the patient to use the medication or the combination if FDA and both the sponsor agree to that, to give the benefit, because patients don't have all the time to wait for the FDA to review it and then for the drug to go to the market and become accessible under standard of care.
Dr. Herrenberg-Klee, I'm going to turn to you. You touched on the Perio-01 trial a little bit, and said maybe in the Q&A we could come back to that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what that treatment involves from an interventional radiology perspective? Oh, you're still muted.
Sure. Yeah, glad to talk about it a little more. I think maybe it's worth just discussing it logistically a little bit as well. So I think a lot of ocular melanoma patients are going to be pretty familiar with the interventional radiology suite, as well as sort of what's involved in any sort of arterial therapy. What I think distinguishes thus far, in our experience, what distinguishes the trial and therapy probably from what's probably present on a lot of message boards and support group forums is we're just infusing a medication. We're not embolizing anything in the same way. So you're not depriving the tumors or your liver of blood supply. So a lot of the typical side effects we discuss as being associated with either radioembolization, immunoembolization, chemoembolization, bland embolization, all those things, are not as present when you're just infusing a medication. The need for there is a need for multiple procedures, right? So there's 6 infusions as part of this trial. So that can have logistical implications, which Kristen has spoken well about it, or at how logistical implications didn't impact her, luckily, but how they might in fact really impact other patients. So that is worth considering. But it's in addition to the infusions, there are biopsies associated with the study as well, and those are helpful for the company to really figure out when the medication works, when it doesn't work, and really correlate that to figure out what features might make it work or not work to help develop it better in the future. I think sometimes when patients see these biopsies on studies, you could rightly be a little bit concerned. It's associated with some additional risk to have biopsies on studies, but those are done in the same procedural setting. So we ultrasound and do our biopsies and then proceed with the procedure. And all interventional radiologists are very familiar with biopsies as well. So you're in good hands with the biopsy as well as the infusion is my point there. And I think, just I guess other logistics that Cam can also speak to, patients, do need to spend quite a few hours after the infusions being monitored as well, because it is currently in the phase 1 aspect of the protocol. So just more sort of logistical things that are involved.
Dr. Montezeri, did you want to add anything?
I wanted to respond to one of the questions and basically Q&A about the trial using 2 combinations of a MEK inhibitor and a PKC inhibitor called IDA, and it was basically an encouraging trial. It was an early phase clinical trial that showed some responses in uveal melanoma patients with again GNA Q11, and this is an early phase trial. Again, I encourage everyone to go to the clinicaltrial.gov website to see all the list of the active trials. It's a very long list. What I mentioned was just an example of different basically types of drugs and mechanism of action of drugs, and it's a very long list of different novel combinations that is basically not included completely in these examples. as for the basically other aspects of the study that Eric was pointing to with the observation requirements, and also what Kristen was mentioning, that it can sometimes be overwhelming, that clinical trials require close observation, close monitoring, frequent visits, multiple imaging, a lot of blood draws, a lot of provider visits, lots of travels. I hear you. I hear all of you that it's very time consuming, energy, and also financially, it's really, or we say money consuming, maybe. It's really, a lot, considering that you are already dealing with something that's so stressful. And, cancer inequity is also another thing that plays a factor, that not everybody's lucky to easily have access to these novel therapies. Unfortunately, some of the basically requirements cannot be taken away, because what is most important to us, and what basically trumps everything else, is safety of patients. There are a lot of unknowns with novel therapies and with drugs that are under investigation. There are some of the adverse events that we know of them because we have some preclinical data, because sometimes these combinations have been tested in other cancers before we enroll patients with ocular melanomas. But other than that, sometimes it's the first time it's being tested in humans. Sometimes these side effects are new, something that we didn't even expect before. So we have to monitor everything very carefully and closely. As for the trial that Eric was mentioning, the SD101, which is infused using the pressure-enabled device, one of the side effects of the drug that we want to monitor is something called cytokine release syndrome. What I always find helpful in explaining is because during COVID time, we have seen patients that become very sick because of the immune response of the body. I use that as an example, that sometimes your immune response is something that makes you sick, because the blood pressure drops, heart rate goes up, you develop fever, sometimes you develop rash, which is because of the basically very robust immune response. And with combinations like TLR9 agonists, we worry about that. If the drug gets into the systemic blood, it may happen. But one reason for using the drug as an basically intra-arterial injection to the tumor site is to spare patients from systemic side effects of that. Usually, these side effects happen within the first infusion or within the first 1 or 2 infusions. So as a basically a very cautious and careful measure, we observe the patients overnight for the first time that they're getting the infusion to monitor their vital signs and their heart rate, blood pressure, and temperature, and to monitor for any severe side effects.
Thank you for going in more detail about that. That's really important to point out about this particular trial and the close monitoring that's needed for all clinical trials in general. Kristen, I'm gonna ask you the last question. If you can give one statement to your fellow ocular melanoma patients about clinical trials, what would it be? What would you tell them?
Go to these meetings that you folks sponsored, first off, so you know more about all the clinical trials and where they're sponsored. And, I think really is, if you personally want a clinical trial as the patient and you have the family support or friend support, whatever the support and resources, I think it's a great shot, because we don't have that much right now. And I know things are coming out more, and I can just tell you, I'm so glad I went on my clinical trial. I am sure I'll be on another clinical trial in the future as well. So it was a very good experience. And hey, I want to help get some cure for this cancer like the next person does. So I think the more we can participate and go with it with open eyes, though. It's not for everybody. It's not for every family. but I think it's something to maybe more consider than maybe you did not in the past.
Well, first of all, Kristen, thank you so much for being a wonderful spokesperson for the Melanoma Research Foundation's Ocular Melanoma Patient Symposium that is coming up at Thomas Jefferson University, August 26th. And Kristen will be there, as well as many other ocular melanoma patients. So trying to continue to build our OM community and provide that important education and collaborative spirit. So thank you for mentioning that, Kristen. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Dr. Montazeri, Dr. Werenberg-Klee, Andrea, and Kristen for being part of this Ask the Expert session today. Thanks again to Trisalis Life Sciences for their generous support. And remember, this program will be available on demand and also streamed to our social media channels in the coming days. Don't forget to visit melanoma.org to learn more about our upcoming webinars and educational opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.